Anyone like to approve the agenda?
I have a request for a change to the agenda.
Okay.
We need to figure out who's going to be our chair. So I thought, right, is this your last meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So
Okay, shall we add that as item
Yeah.
3?
We should add that.
Just take care of it after we approve the agenda. And if anyone wants to approve the agenda with that change,
Moving.
move to.
Move to approve the agenda. Change to discuss and vote on the new chair.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so who would like to be chair, or would somebody like to make a motion to nominate someone to be chair?
Have there been any?
Or could wait until next meeting if we want to see who else gets appointed to fill
Okay.
those vacancies. That's also, we can certainly have a discussion that says this is going to be a thing at the next one.
Is there anybody in the wings? Anybody?
I haven't heard, I emailed Aaron and Leah today to go and say, you're also up. So Aaron has put in his application to re-up.
Right.
I'm going to guess Leah probably will as well. But I haven't heard back from her. She's on vacation.
Right.
Stuck in an airport somewhere.
So nobody's
so
on wind. Okay.
Nope. But I did let Evelyn know, and she's going to start advertising for it. So hopefully, and if anyone knows anyone, point them in the right direction.
Yep.
What does that process look like? I did it only a year ago, but from the outside. So from the inside, what do we need to do there?
If somebody wants to sign up, they can contact Evelyn Prim, and she can send them the link to the application. Or if they get in touch with me, I can send them the link as well. And then once the applications are in, we put it on the council agenda. And we usually ask folks, especially if they're new, to maybe Zoom in or go to the meeting when they're appointed, just so counselors can put a name to a face. But that's the general process.
I didn't find out that I was in until after. I didn't even know that anybody looked at my application.
Yeah, we're trying to do a better job of inviting people to the meeting. We did find out, it's like, why doesn't anybody ever show up? And it's like, well, we haven't actually been telling. Like, all right, that's on us. That's on us. We actually need to go and let you know you're up for nomination on your committee appointment. So we're trying to do a better job of that.
Maria, as the current vice chair, what is your interest in serving as chair?
I do not have an interest serving as chair.
Are you interested in continuing as vice chair?
I would, unless there's people here who are like amped up and want to take over as chair and vice chair. You know.
Okay.
If there's an alliance brewing, which we didn't know about. I know, right?
Tim and I had discussed, what Ariane had emailed us, and she'd said, also, Aaron, like, feel free to. We were saying that maybe we would prefer to offer to one of the more senior members first. So, Aaron and Maria, I know Gabe is not interested.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Unless everybody wants to do it. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of. When Sean and I chatted last week, we had similar feelings, which was basically very happy to be on the planning commission and not necessarily chomping at the bit to be chair. Okay. Yeah.
Speak, but the only reason I emailed No, not either. Because last time you weren't interested, so I didn't have a
I wanted
chance.
you, well, it's because I wanted you.
I suppose I am
No,
slightly more senior
I'm
than.
really
Yeah.
honest about that. I thought it was really important. So. Great. Is that something that we can vote on?
Yeah, let's do it now.
Right? Yeah.
Then you can make comments.
Yeah.
Before he changes his mind.
Yeah.
No,
I
I
think-
did ask Leah after the last meeting if she was not interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had a feeling this might be happy.
All right, well, I'm gonna say if we should probably just put that on the
Okay.
meeting for the 8th, just to make sure, because it wasn't on this agenda and we don't need somebody making a whatever, but
Okay.
it wasn't on the agenda and therefore
Great.
we couldn't make that decision.
I
So,
think that sounds good.
and I'll also check the rules of procedure to make sure there aren't other positions. I think we technically have chair, vice chair, and I think we do have secretary, although we do our own minutes. So we pay somebody to do the minutes, so it doesn't end up being a thing. But I should just check the rules of procedure before the next meeting to make sure we don't have any other positions.
Okay. All right. Well, as comments from the chair, I have no comments other than thank everyone, other than to thank Mike for all your work and all the members of the planning commission for your work, and really enjoyed working with you. And
And
that's
I
it.
think we all have
Thank-
to say thank you.
Thank you.
All your
Yes.
work here, and you represented us on the regional planning, and just thanks.
Oh, I went to maybe 4 meetings.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Kate. All right. So general business, comments from the public about something not on the agenda. Okay. All right. Update on planning projects in the city.
All right. So, as you know, as I mentioned, we did get the Northern New England chapter APA plan of the year. So not only are we tops for Vermont, we're now Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire. So
Woo.
yay for us. Uh,
Maybe we go to national.
Yeah.
this means we go to nationals. We'll be in the final 64 square. You'll just have to look for us. So yeah, we'll figure out what happens from there, but it's great. This is the first time one of my projects that I've worked on has gotten that far, so kind of nice. There is still an appeal pending on the regional approval, which is being handled by the Regional Planning Commission. So far, the city has not intervened yet. So we're just waiting and letting the RPC run that process, and we'll see what happens with that.
This is Steve's appeal.
Steve's appeal, yes. We have our grant applications that are due next Tuesday. So we've got all the disaster recovery funds that the state has. We've got 4 applications in going for the city, which we talked about a little bit at the last meeting. We also have, I've learned we have about 3 or 4 other projects that were submitted by individuals. Downstreet has 2 applications in for Heaton Street, for projects up there to try to get funding to help close the gap on some affordable projects over there. We've got a project on Northfield Street. It's a private project that they're trying to get funding for. I think it's for 28 units on Northfield Street. And I think that's it for the big ones. Then there's some Regional Planning Commission has some other ones that they're working on as well that may involve the city. So there's upgrades to the telecommunication towers and some things like that. So I think there's a lot of good potential coming out of this. I'll be very interested to see what ends up coming out. Could be a lot of great projects for the city that we need from the mitigation. We just were notified today that we are eligible for what's called the Catalyst Grant. Most people call it the Northern Borders Grant. So we did get green lighted to put in an application. This is another one where you put in a pre-application, then they screen you and they approve your project. So we've got approval to put in that application as well. So we've just been going grant to grant to grant. So hopefully we can stop doing grants. But it's good to get the grants out, good to hopefully get some money in, but writing grants is not a lot of fun. And so and doing so many of them all at once.
The Northern Borders one, is that for Club Road?
That's Country Club Road, yes. Yep. To do strictly infrastructure on that one.
Right.
And then, yeah, I think that's probably it, unless somebody has some other questions on other stuff we're working on in the city.
Maybe it was at the meeting that I wasn't present at, but this is I had heard that we have a new planning department employee. I'm wondering if you might be able to chat a bit about them.
Yeah, so our community and economic development specialist, as you know, Josh Jerome left probably in May. And so had that seat vacant for about 3 months, and we hired a gentleman, Matt Jalasik, and he is from Boston area, Harvard grad, background in architecture and also public health. So, but he's got a lot of experience, worked in USAID, was a college professor. So he just is very knowledgeable about urban planning and these types of things. And, but he's not from the area. So he's kind of really getting the deep dive, quick, learning all the issues and kind of getting caught up. But he's really great. Very much enjoy having him in the office. And
awesome. Thank you.
Have there been any further updates on Country Club Road? I think last time we talked, they were looking, city council was looking for a consultant maybe to.
Oh, for the developer, yes. So we did have that conversation, and council did recommend moving forward with a developer. And we're getting a contract from White and Burke to get approval of. And so the purpose of that is to try to expedite and refine a process so we can get a developer on board. The reason we couldn't apply for the disaster recovery funding for Country Club Road was because, excuse me, we did not have a developer on board who would build the housing that was necessary. So we always knew we were going to get there. We just kind of had to quickly shift gears to make that the first thing we do rather than the last thing we do. So we do anticipate a kind of a two-step process. The first step will be kind of getting letters of interest from developers, and we're hoping to have that process done by the end of the year, end of January, to get a group of to develop the RFP, which we want to do really quickly, get that out, give developers a couple of months to decide whether they're interested in pursuing a project at Country Club Road. Then we would refine that down to an invitation where we would say, because it's very expensive to put together these types of proposals. So you really want to be able to go through, screen it down, and hopefully get between 1 and 3 people that we would invite in to say, all right, put together a more refined plan. Tell us very specifically what you would do so we can make a decision of we would like to offer a contract to X or Y firm. And so that's kind of the thought on the timing of that. And the hope would be that we could have a developer by, let's say, next year at this time. We could by September of next year. If that would give us the phase 1, we would select them. We would then give them 5 or 6 months to go through and put together a proposal. We would review that proposal, and then make a selection. Now, it's possible we may only end up with one qualified developer, in which case we would be working a little more back and forth with them for that 6-month period to kind of decide. But that's big picture. We really want to see what we get. We know there's a lot of development companies that are interested, but how many are willing to step in and say, yeah, we're willing to spend some money to investigate the potential of this site. And then we had also at the last meeting was a discussion, and it's continued to this Wednesday to finalize the designs for Country Club Road. potentially lowering the grade a little bit, which is, it's about 13.5% grade, and we're going to bring it down to 12. And that will help that. It'll also clean up the intersection, align it better with the railroad tracks, and then put a sidewalk in. They just have to, what we need council to approve is, do we want to spend the extra money to lower the grade of the road? Do we want to spend the extra money to elevate Route 2? Which is staff and DPW's recommendation. We think that would be in the best interest of this project in the long run. If we're already digging up the road to put in sewer and water pipes, it only makes sense that we would also then rip up the road and adjust the grades to make sure that everything is done all at once. So that's a lot that's going on. And hopefully, like we said, we'll get through these next couple of weeks, get these grant applications in, and then we kind of get into the waiting game on a couple of things and let us start to get, as we have with we're doing the zoning amendment, we're going to be talking about that, but we really haven't put together any red lines or started to develop anything, which we're going to need to start doing, but we really have to wait till after we get through this window of the crunch time here, and hopefully the end of October, November, we can start getting you guys some red line versions of what we're thinking about, so we can start making some decisions.
Okay, great. So should we segue on to number 6 then?
All right, so continue work on the zoning and discussion areas in part 2. So I'm not going to go back and re-summarize what we talked about last meeting. So that was big picture. We've got part 2 up to the design review. We're not going to do design review. So we're really talking about the zoning map, the dimensional requirements, and those requirements that are in each one of those zoning districts, and then the use table. And Tim sent along, some color-coded ones, which I printed out just in case people wanted to have those, which starts to look at what uses are allowed, which ones are conditional for each one of the districts. We have had in the past suggestions for changes, and really at this point, we're just going to go through and start writing down what are the changes we want. We can make a few votes if we want to start to say what we want in the draft. One suggestion staff had was to remove the municipal zoning district, just merge those parcels in with whatever's surrounding it. It's really not, sometimes municipal parcels get sold and they end up in their own district. So we should eliminate those just to clean things up. Nick has looked carefully at some of the zoning district lines, and some of them don't snap to their boundaries. And so he has a number of these that you'll never see at the usual scale of the map, but he just said if we're doing this, we'll clean up all those little node snaps and make sure this is as close to a clean boundaries as we can get them. We have had recommendations. I believe Gabe sent a recommendation to combine res 1,500 and 3,000, which staff agrees is an appropriate thing to do based on the fact that the densities have changed the way they have. Those really shouldn't be 2 separate zoning districts anymore. And there was a suggestion to merge Res 6 and Res 9, which I think is possible, but I think it's less clear than the first ones. So that's another recommendation that was on the table. I've also had conversations with folks. I've mentioned to you about Riverfront has been a tricky, weird zoning district. It includes areas such as Little Gasoline Alley, Domino's Pizza, Cumberland Farms, Dunkin' Donuts. That's in Riverfront. But so is that stretch of Berry Street that is after Nelson Street as it's starting to move out of town. So that's mostly multifamily. The commercial that is out there might be some offices, some law offices, but that type of development doesn't exist. So they're really very different areas. And then Stonecutters Way is also part of, and Stonecutters Way are these large commercial office buildings, the co-op. It extends down through down Granite Street, where we've got some old granite sheds and Caledonia Spirits. And so very, very, again, very different, not like Gasoline, not like Berry Street. So I think we could do well to split that into different districts and maybe consider, Berry doesn't have to be its own district. We could make that mixed use residential, and it would probably match those pretty well. I think the gas station area really needs to be its own zoning district. It's very much unique. And then I think Stonecutters Way, as it spreads out, and I had conversations with the folks at Sabins Pasture about maybe including their property. They're looking at potentially larger residential structures, which really would be very different than Berry Street, but would be more consistent with the larger buildings that you might see. These wouldn't be larger commercial, but they would be larger residential. And I think just the arrangement of those, I think that would make sense to include as part of the Stonecutters Way district. The last one that I talked about with the Sabins folks is if you know, and I can pull these up if you want me to pull up the maps, I see them in my head, you might not, is if you look at Country Club Road, we've got that high density urban residential, and then we have a res 3000 for that upper part. They also have an area that is that high density. It's currently riverfront, but they also have some part of their 100 acres that is also developable that extends where the road would be that would connect these two properties. And so it would make sense to also have that potentially be residential 3000 as well. We don't have a line for that yet. We would have to put something together, but I think that would be another change that we should certainly put on there. So a new zoning district in Sabins, maybe splitting Riverfront into 3 different pieces, really based on bulk and massing, the big buildings, the small buildings, and then the gasoline alley. And then I think, yeah, those other 2 that I had explained, the mergers. But is there anything else? We can shift the lines on things. We can talk about merging more. There's a lot of opportunities here. And then obviously we can start also talking about whether we need to adjust uses on the table. And I'm pretty sure we also have one set of changes for the uses on the table, which I think, let me see if I've already got it in here in red. And then I'll stop rambling and let you guys talk because it's about you, not about me. The top of the use table, the first residential character is 1 to 4 dwelling units. Multifamily is 5 to 14. Well, we've just made the new rules say that everything up to 6 is allowed regardless of density. So we could have on that use table, say 1 to 6 dwelling units is the top line, 7 to 14 is multifamily, is the smaller multifamily, 15 or more is the larger multifamily.
I think that change makes a ton of sense. And feels very aligned.
So last meeting, I'd like to, I don't know if we can take some time to chat about, we had a lot of discussion about character of the neighborhood potentially being weaponized, even for 6 and smaller units, if there's steep slopes or curb cuts or something that pushes something to the GRB. And, I'm frankly, I just going through the city plan, just this chapter is, I don't know, it's a lot of pages. We don't have the time to go word by word and look at everything. Can we create a paragraph at the very beginning of this chapter that just acknowledges that things will, despite the language that follows in terms of character of the neighborhood, we would love to see lots of infill, 6 units and smaller, and it will create, a different feel to the neighborhood, but we want that. I don't know exactly what that language looks like, but does that, I know we've got some attorneys in the room, right? Does that sort of fit to say, look, yes, you can no longer weaponize this because we're telling you, we understand the character is X, but we've already said at the very beginning of this chapter, and then we don't have to worry about all the rest of the language.
I'm curious if we can just step back just a minute and ask Mike if what are the requirements around characteristic of a neighborhood? Are there any?
So legally, in the past, if you were to go back and actually, if you're probably to go to most, grab Woodbury's or somebody's rural zoning regulations, they probably just will say, if you're a conditional use, you have to, one of the requirements is character of the area. That you can evaluate something on, but they don't have anything that provides any guidance for that. There was a decision called JAM Golf, came out of South Burlington, I think, and that one really is what was the push probably 15, 20 years ago now, to go through and start saying you really have to, especially in places like Montpelier and Chittenden County, to start saying, what does it mean? In that case, it was about scenic resources shall not have negative impact on the scenic character of the area.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, the judge was like, yeah, that's vague and
Yeah.
void for vagueness. And you've got issues with that. And so it kind of forced everybody to go and say, you can't just say you can't impact the scenic qualities. You have to actually go through and say, okay, you can say that, but then you have to have some guidelines to say, okay, what does it mean to protect the scenic quality? What is the thing we're trying to protect?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were kind of forced into that direction of starting to define, if we have character of the area, how does the DRB evaluate that when we have a character of the area? So we try to put in here a little description of what the character is. And you've recognized it. People have pointed out the fact that it now gets used as a club to beat people with. And
Yep.
ours, I haven't gone through to read them all, but other folks have read through them and kind of said a lot of them are really describing what's on the ground today and not really being a character of the area. You can define character of the area as a future state as well. The character of this area is intended to be, as opposed to is.
Yeah.
You could then go through and describe what this area could look like, or we would want this to look like. And then when the DRB gets an application for a project that's a conditional use, maybe it's a multifamily structure with 15 or more units in mixed use residential. I'm just pulling that up. It is a conditional use. So someone has a 20-unit building, it's going to be on Northfield Street. That's mixed use residential, I believe. So great. We got a 20-unit building. It has to meet the character of the area. That's one of the requirements. Got to meet traffic, got to meet character of the area, and it has to meet impact on facilities and services, which is always no. Because we have enough facilities and services, but it's a requirement. So we've got that one. Traffic would be evaluated. There would be a requirement for 15 or more. There's a requirement to do the traffic study. The fact that it's on Northfield Street probably means it's not going to have a negative impact because it's such a major roadway.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dumping a whole bunch of people onto a small road, but they would have to do a traffic study and they would have to do the character of the area. But again, if it's set up, and very rarely does it, people will bring it up, but very rarely does the DRB really use that as a reason for denying any applications.
Yeah.
It'd have to be something really out of the character. Yeah.
It's the potential is there, and I know that it's been used in the past and will likely be used in the future. All right, another potentially silly question. If it's character of the area, could we potentially have a description for, let's say, the new Res 1.5 combined with Res 3? And that is the area, that's the zoning area, and we'll have a character of that area. I'm saying that as like an alternative to a dozen to 15 different small neighborhood character descriptions, because it really begins to pigeonhole each of these little tiny area spots within Montpelier, when the future of Montpelier may not fall within those little silos so easily. So could an area be a zoning district?
Yes, we don't, as Tim points out, we have called it character of the neighborhood. Big picture, it's character of the area in statute, but we've kind of narrowed it down to character of the neighborhood. And our zoning map breaks the districts into neighborhoods. So, and the neighborhoods have descriptions. We certainly can go back and combine them together. Some of them were because we had places like Riverfront where how do you do a character of the area for Riverfront when you've got such disparate areas? Well, if we're going to split that into 3 different areas, that goes away. Now we can have a character of the area for that. It'll probably be its own zoning district. So we won't be getting rid of the zoning district, but it makes sense that that would be its own zoning district. And then these other ones, we could merge the neighborhoods into a single description.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing that out there as some ideas to think about.
Could we have a map like that, GIS map up on the screen? So does everyone have it on their computers? I can pull it up. It's like really
I have the
hard to
PDF,
talk
but-
about this without it
Yeah, that's a good
in
point.
front of you. I can share it, right?
Okay, and I think Doug wanted to make a comment, and Doug, if you can come up to one of the microphones.
Good evening. My name is Doug Swarzy, live at 8 Judson Drive, Montpelier. And I have 3 concerns I wanted to share with you about neighborhood character. I'm going to reference sections, subsections, etc. I'll give you a copy of what I'm speaking from, but let me roll through it if you would, please. First concern, section 2113. Rural district and neighborhoods, specifically sub B, neighborhood character of Sabins pasture. I'm requesting a rewrite of paren 5 to parallel CCR 2112B paren 1 country club. Suggested Sabins pasture rewrite of 2113B paren 5 follows. This 94-acre parcel includes 15 acres of riverfront and approximately 80 acres of rural. The property was part of an approved TIF master application. Sabins pasture can provide housing now. The city needs to pursue acquiring infrastructure funds for access to facilitate high-density housing growth. The parcel also provides for future constructive collaboration with the Country Club Road site. The parcel enables residential buildings up to 4 stories with flexible rules in how it is designed without building footprint restrictions. Proposed development should promote a pedestrian-oriented design and connectivity with the pedestrian path. Now, I just indicated 4 stories. That leads me to my second concern. If we look at 2104 Riverfront District of the Neighborhoods, particularly F, and more importantly, figure 2.04, building height and restriction, footprint presently is 5,000 square feet max and height presently 45 feet. The building footprint and maximum height must correlate with the requested rewrite of 2113B paren 5. Comment 3 pertains to 2201H, which is the Design Review Overlay District Design Review Standards, particularly paren 1, paren C, which is for projects that do not involve a historic building. And if we more in particular look at double I paren, new development, paren 3, orientation. Present requirement is fronts parallel to street. Comment is need to incorporate the alternative opportunity to orient a building's front to solar south. And appreciate your consideration, if you would. I'll give my time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you guys want me to turn on the lights here? So.
So I think one of the comments that we got over and over again is that there are too many zoning districts. And I know it's because, yes, I kind of like, I understand both sides of this argument. But then when you step back and realize there's 14 zoning districts. Or how many square miles is Montpelier?
10.
10 square miles, you know, it's just a lot, right? And so I was on my run this morning. And I was like, well, don't we want, well, I don't like the urban centers, like it seems like a lot of Vermont statutes are trying to make sure that development is consolidated. So we don't want to affect these outlying regions of Montpelier because the whole kind of like what we say in our city plan is that we want this open land and we want to preserve it by focusing development on the core. So during my run today, I'm wondering why there are 3 urban centers designations. Like, what is the difference between 2 and 3? And maybe we should just say that from now on, urban center 1 is kind of like a block in every direction out of what it currently is.
So the difference, again, this reflects what's on the ground. It's also in our historic district. So we've got, you know, balancing. We do have a certain amount of historic preservation goals. We want infill, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're looking for bulldozing a lot of our historic buildings. But the urban 1, your light purple, is an area where you're allowed to have block style construction. So what that means is you can have 0 setbacks. Aubuchon's connects right up to its next building, which connects up to the next building. Some of them may have an alley, but for the most part, you have these squarish block style construction. You do have some like City Hall that is separate, but for the most part, the allowed and expected is that they would be block style allowed, and that includes the Capitol complex where there isn't necessarily a lot of that block style. They are really large buildings, so one could argue that, you know, you could have an urban center 4. But we included all that as urban center 1. The one, I believe, urban center 3 is your dark purple heading out to the roundabout. That area all have separate buildings. And so that's really it's just a character difference between them. So, and we tried to match that with, and you can see a little bit if you look at the parcel sizes of the medium purple on Berry Street, that's urban center 2. You can see that the parcels themselves are smaller. The buildings are generally smaller, except for the Catholic Church, in comparison to the other side. But I think we probably could combine urban center 2 and 3, but I think it would really be more for the fact that we just are trying to get smaller, you know, less districts.
Well, there's demolition rules for historic buildings. So it's not like if we approve consolidating everything into one urban center, no one's going, I mean, they wouldn't be allowed to just demolish those like beautiful Victorians and put up like a Blanchard block. I think that, like, even though the zone, because there's demolition rules against it, right?
Yes.
So they are protected in that sense.
But if something were to happen where there was a fire, the reconstruction could look significantly different. It could be more blockish rather than, a rebuilt, not that you'd rebuild it as a Victorian, but you'd rebuild something as an individual building as opposed to a block that's waiting for its next block to attach to it.
Right.
But again, it's the plan and it's the zoning. And if the thought is, you know what, we don't know, one more flood and maybe a couple of these buildings have to be removed. We have that a little bit on um, the Elm Street got hit particularly hard, and there are some buildings that are going to be lost on that side, and it could impact, the reconstruction could be like, well, we already have some block style buildings. That's why it's in Urban Center 1. But that could certainly extend farther out towards the Spring Street intersection.
To me, this is a question of, in 100 years, what do we want the city to look like? So, I mean, there is a sense that nothing is forever. Buildings, especially wood ones, catch on fire. That happens as part of just I think the organic nature of the city has to grow. So I'd like for us to think about how would we like it to grow, so that it's done intentionally and not kind of like piecemeal. And then, we could end up with a big old McDonald's somewhere, the big old drive-through, nice parking lot, or like a Lowe's or Home Depot, that could easily happen. It's happened in every other small city in America. I would like to see that not happen here. So
Yeah, I had suggested that too, and I know, that like obviously we're not doing anything today. There's all kinds of public comment and people are going to have anxiety, but there are protections over historic buildings. And, I think the reality of much of this space is that, flood, whatever the waters that we have are going to dictate future construction, right? Whatever is going to be, if something happens with a federal building or behind the federal building, like we have to be real about what's there. It's like, look, you're going to get flooded. And so you're going to have to go up and build something and it will look different, but it's still in design review, right, Mike? So anything, even if we, I was thinking of Tim Heaney coming in saying, look, I built that whole neighborhood, on the up on Northfield Street, and the zoning regs were 40 pages or something. And I can't, it's like, well, can we get back to something that's just easier for people to look at? So I'd be in favor of that, whatever we can do. So thanks.
People that wanted to move to a small, a smaller house, a smaller apartment in the walkable part of the city, and they couldn't, and so they ended up moving to Northfield Street. Because that's where the housing is.
Yeah.
I would love to see that kind of like development closer together. Because it seems that's what people want. They moved to here to live in a walkable city. And I think we need to give them walkable housing too. So I don't know. I mean, you're right about the fire and of course the flooding. I mean, some of these buildings, if they are torn down because of flooding, will need to be taller. Because maybe the first floor now becomes, you kind of see it all over like coastal communities. The first floor now becomes a parking garage.
Parking, yeah.
Or something that can tolerate being flooded. I was actually in New Jersey during the hurricane that just passed through, and the town that we were in flooded on a Thursday. And by Friday, it was all completely back open because everything is built there to kind of like have these floodwaters ebb and flow. And it was remarkable seeing videos of the night before and then to be able to go there 24 hours later and it's fine. So I think that is probably Montpelier's future is to build like that. I don't know. What do other people think?
I'm thinking that maybe the way to tackle this is to decide what we want our zoning districts to be, and then because we can't really talk about it. It's like, well, let's like adjust the max height on this district and then doesn't make sense to come back to that district then and be like, well, actually, let's combine it with this other one and make a completely different district. So yeah, I do want to see some consolidation in urban and if we eliminated riverfront and put that into whatever our other ones are. My thinking is that we want to encourage some form of infill, correct? And so if we upzone most areas, you create new minimum sizes for things. But that everything that is still there would conform for the most part. So that if you had Res 3000 now become only Res 1500, everything in Res 3000 that is currently there should conform with the possibility of becoming smaller lots in the future. And we could discuss whether any amount of Res 6000 should get turned into Res 3000. Or do we take the residential ones and do we eliminate Res 9000 and move to 3 res districts? And then figure out how to use mixed use residential to better effect, especially in what's currently riverfront. Those are some and then Gasoline Alley perhaps getting rolled into Eastern Gateway or Western Gateway, sorry, in some manner. Rather than creating a whole new, creating anything new that we consolidate the districts and figure out where they are going to apply on the map.
I have more of a process question at this point, which is my understanding was when we started doing this a couple of months ago, we were going to do a front to back sort of overview of these entire bylaws, and then we could start figuring out where we want to move things and change things. What I fear is that we don't have a good sense of like what the forest is yet, but we're starting to prune trees. Like let's not do that. And unless my understanding is not correct. So I would just say like let's try to keep our powder dry and like take notes, keep this stuff in mind. I think it's difficult for me at least to figure out when we need to start doing dives. And I'm afraid that once we start diving into these things, we lose momentum in terms of the overall goal. I think right now is just to get the commissioners kind of up to speed generally on what these bylaws really are and how they interact. There's going to be plenty of time to get our hands dirty with all this stuff. But that's just my thought. People disagree. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I think we had talked about that, Aaron, that we were gonna less of making decisions, but in the very least, what we'll want to do is to keep taking down these notes and ideas where people are thinking about, so that way we can kind of bring it back around when we get to December and we're like, okay, now we've gotten through the whole zoning. Now let's go back and start thinking about, now that you all understand how major site plan works, when we talk about, well, if we make these changes here, these few changes here, that's going to make a big difference on, the comments that we heard about the difficulty of applications or this. It's like, well, we've excluded all these, or we've made those changes, or we've changed the subdivision regulations in this way. So that way now the process is much, much more efficient. The plan may still be 200 pages long, or the zoning may still be 200 pages long, but it's going to run much more efficiently. And again, I think the difference, getting a little bit to Gabe's point, a little bit of the difference between the world that that folks dealt with in the past is that the legal environment was very different back then. It's really changed a lot. It's a much more litigious, people used to have public comment. Now public comment is your foray into making your appeals. And so a lot of stuff is just by necessity, we have to have more words to be able to describe the same thing. And I think if someone were to sit down in a review process, you'd start to understand sometimes we're like, take the height of a building. Like, okay, height's 40 feet. What if the front of the house is here and the back of the house is here? How do you measure height? Well, now we need more words to explain how do you measure height. In the past, you used to just say, yeah, I got a height of 40 feet and you kind of figure it out. But now we've got to have rules that say, all right, how do we measure height? How do we calculate setbacks? Does setbacks go to the foundation or does setbacks go to the drip edge? What happens if you build a house and you're at a 5-foot setback and you want to put gutters on? Can you put gutters on? Because now you're going to be 4 inches into your setback. So we have to have rules that are like, yeah, this is how we measure these things. This is how we do things. And again, if we weren't in an area where, and in a community where appeals happen, you could probably get away with rules that aren't quite nailed down. You can get away with a 100-page zoning bylaw because it's just nobody's going to be taking you to court. We all sit down, we all have a good conversation, we make an agreement, and we move on. That's not our professional experience here. We have to make sure we can defend each one of these points when it gets litigated. And unfortunately, that means longer regulations and it means coming down, taking some time. But our hope is as staff, our recommendation has been more, we want to make this as clean and efficient a process as possible, make it as administrative as possible, because that makes it easier for the applicant. It's going to mean longer regulations. We can make shorter regulations. Shorter regulations probably means more DRB hearings. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
So I mean, I think it is a good time to think about the process though, right? And just figure out what we do want to do. And I would just say this, right? Like, took 10 years to do a city plan. And so, 400 pages of regulations. My view as a guy who's done a little bit of development in town is that this chapter 2, is really like the driving force as people are trying to figure out economies of scale, if things pencil, right? If these projects make sense. The things behind it, although I do want to learn more about design review, but the things behind it are really technical. And I personally don't want to mess with much of that. I mean, we paid a lot of money over the years. We've had things tested in court. And to me, not that we don't want to review them, but those are more appropriate when there's a problem that the staff comes, kind of like we had, hey, these are emergency things we need fixed. To me, here's a specific thing we ran into where solar shading, right? Solar shading needs to be addressed, right?
Yes.
So let's work on that as opposed to, citizen, servants, going through and trying to redline. So I'm all about, like, if we want to spend another couple of weeks doing that, I do think this is the meat of where we're going to end up spending our time. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's good to talk about process as well, and I think this approach makes a lot of sense. I'm feeling like if we were to be making decisions, like we're talking about this right now, we're getting recommendations from staff. If we were to make decisions right now, it would feel for me like a decent amount of pressure. So I really like what we're doing at the moment. It feels a lot more like brainstorming and wrapping our heads around the situation. I think making notes about our thoughts, recommendations, hearing from staff in this moment as well makes a lot of sense as well, too. And then we can hop into part 3, go from there, and then decision making can happen at a later date.
Yeah, so we really only have to get through part 3, just so everybody knows. Part 4 are your rules of procedure of how everything works. Those are all set in statute. 99% of that is something we either can't change, or you actually could be free to go through getting to the point of making the document shorter. You actually could go through and eliminate some and just go and say, appeals shall be per 4470 of the act. And that's a disservice to people who might be wanting to appeal because they're like, well, what do I have to put in my appeal? Well, that's all written in statute. It's all written in this book over here. What we did is took the state law and rewrote it into the statute, into our regulations that said, if you want to appeal, these are the 5 things you have to include in appeal. These are the requirements. These are the things and how the process works. You need to warn it in the newspaper 15 days in advance. We don't have to put that in our regulations. That's in state law. We could just go and say, we are going to warn everything per state law, and that's it. And that's a conversation we can have over how much information do we want to have in our regulations. That is simply a rewrite of the state law. Because we put it in there because we feel we shouldn't be asking residents to go through and look at the statutes online to learn what the process is. We should be telling them what that process is. You know, who is an interested party? Who is an interested person? We could just go and say that's per state law. And actually, nowadays, we should probably go through and say this is per state law and this is what it's written, because for decades, the legislature never really changed much in Title 24, and now suddenly it's an annual thing. So
Yeah.
we actually may need to lean a little bit more on per state law because they keep changing state law on us. But that's for another day when we get there for part 4, if we want to kind of look at that. But most of that is actually just text that's already there. The next section is really that's part 3. But we have a second half of part 2. Meredith has already been in touch with the DRC and the Historic Preservation Commission. So the next part, once we get done with our zoning map discussion, is the design review. So the overlays, and we only have one, which is design. And they really are interested in coming in and having a conversation with you about the work that they did to develop these design review regulation rules that were adopted in 2020-ish.
Yes.
Yes, right around 2020, they were adopted, give or take. But they put a lot of work into it. When we went to adopt the zoning in 2018, well, it was 2017 that was most of the conversation. There was a lot of pushback on the design regulations, and we decided at that time, Aaron was still here for that one, let's not make that change. Let's assign that to the HPC to go through and come up with some new rules to bring back to the community for consideration. And they came back with new rules. They're just going to explain that process, what the new rules say, and if they have any suggested changes, they'll let you know. And it'll give you really a chance to go and ask them. And then the DRC, I don't know if they'll be at the same meeting or if we'll have a separate meeting for them, but the DRC's Design Review Commission, they actually enforce the design review rules. So they were written by the HPC, they're enforced by the DRC, and there's sometimes a lot of misconceptions about it because for 40 years before 2020, there was a completely different set of rules. And a lot of people had a lot of experiences, positive and a lot negative, about their experience going through that process. And sometimes people talk about how hard design review is. And I think it's really very different today, but we can have them describe both. Many of them have been on both the old rules and the new rules. And so hopefully they'll be able to answer a lot of the questions that you might have about those rules. And whether we need to adjust the map. Do we need to adjust the map, make it bigger, smaller? Do we need the rules to change? But we can have those conversations at the next meeting. So yeah, I don't think this has to take a long time, Gabe. If we did a meeting on that in October, and a discussion, we could have part 3 done in November that might have to get split into 2 for November. So I think by December, we could be in a position where we're basically back to this spot of, okay, well, now that we've gone through the whole set of regulations, what do we think about? What are the big changes that we want to look at? And as Gabe says, I do think the zoning map is going to be one of those places. I do think there's a lot of room for us to make improvements to this. And the question is going to come down to what are they, and And, are we making a couple changes? Or are we making big changes?
I'm curious if we can jump back into some details
Yeah.
here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was wondering, Mike, from the beginning, at the beginning, when you were talking about staff recommendations, you were alluding to a combination of the Res 6000 and Res 9000, and I sensed some hesitation. I'm curious if you can chat about the thinking staff has about that.
So I think I don't think there's going to be the small p political things that are going to jump in with this. For people that didn't like being in Res 9 to now be bumped to Res 6. I think some of the differences, so they're with any district, we really think of three things: parcel size, your buildings, setback, bulk, massing, and your uses. So I don't think there's very many use differences between Res 9 and Res 6. They're pretty much the same. The lot sizes get a little bit smaller, but generally, if you have an existing lot, let's say you're in Res 6, chances are really good. Now, 90% of everybody's conforming, so you probably have at least a 6,000 square foot lot. But really, you can't subdivide till you have 12,000 square feet. And so you basically have to have a double lot. And your house would have to be situated in such a place that you'd actually have room to make that subdivision to make it work. And that other half of the parcel has to be buildable. Sometimes you've got steep slopes, and it's like, oh yeah, that's great. I got a double lot, but my double lot's so steep I actually can't build on it. So there's a lot that can come in. So I'm a little less worried about the parcel size being an issue there. I think it just comes down to some of the so you think about some of the bulk and massing. So you've got your places on College Street. Those are that's some of your Res 6, as opposed to, Town Hill or some of these other places. So, but, I guess thinking about it, it's probably not that.
They're pretty close. I mean, like,
That
if you were to pull
difference.
up the dimensional standards, I mean, they're different, but they're
They're different only by, 15 feet, 10 feet instead of 15 feet on the side or something to that effect. And maybe, so yeah, maybe that's not as big of a stretch, but it's certainly going to make people jumpy about those large lots. Those people who own a big parcel.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, now, of course, everyone likes to multiply it out. You've got 1 acre. And the neighbors are already freaking out because you have 1 acre and you're in Res 9, you can build 7 units. What is it? Whatever.
Yeah.
You've got a lot more potential out there. And then all of a sudden that gets jumped to Res 6, and suddenly they can be putting 14 units out there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And frankly, if I'm putting on my little p political hat, Res 9000 has a lot of opportunity, in my opinion, a lot of opportunity for infill. There are city services that go throughout Res 9000, as I understand, and sidewalks that go throughout Res 9000.
Less sidewalks. Res 6 generally has the sidewalks. Res 9, we're trying to get a little bit more, but
Well, Res 9 has at least some.
Yeah.
Meredith, I'd like to hear from you, and then I'd like to. Yeah.
Just something that might help.
Yeah.
Would you like me to pull up the water lines?
Sure. That's helpful.
So the darker greenish here is Res 9. The lighter that's sort of fading almost to yellow is the Res 6.
Great. Yeah, that's helpful to see. So I would say in Res 9000, and not complete, but a lot of city services to go out to these areas. I will stick to my original statement that I think that there's a ton of opportunity for infill in these locations. When density is there's a debate around density, whether it's highly dense or low density. I would like to see these areas to be higher density. It's also a lot of area. The Res 6000 is really generally small. It's College Street, Ridge Street, a bit of Upper Main, First Ave. And, if I think about if I think about the density of that neighborhood, I would love to see that throughout all of Res 9000. So, yeah, with that said, I think that a combination of the 1500 and 3000 makes a lot of sense, and 6000 and 9000 makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep. And those are the policy decisions that you guys will vote on and send to council. So, I mean, we'll have our thoughts, but from an administration standpoint, we can administer either one equally.
Yeah.
One other thing about this map, so and this kind of goes to what Doug was one of the issues that Doug was raising. So Crestview neighborhood is all Res 9000, and that is all trees.
It's off Terrace Street. So there's a reason for that.
I know that that was so that Alan Goldman could potentially develop it. So my point is going over now to Sabins and the top of Country Club Road, where it is now currently mostly rural. I think it makes a lot of sense to make sure that any potential Country Club Road development is able to connect through with a potential future road there.
Yep. So, yes. So there are two approaches to doing the zoning of these large parcels. One of them is to do like we're kind of doing over here in these areas with Sabins and Country Club Road, which is to leave the parts that we want rural as rural and put the parts that we want developed into an appropriate category. So when the Planning Commission originally made a proposal for Sabins Pasture, the Sabins Pasture parcel, it was recommended to go in as all Res 6000. Make it all the same. Because we felt the people who owned the property would then have the ability to, if they want to cluster everything at the lower area, which would make sense for them because they would have less infrastructure to build out, they would use a PUD or do some clustering to make that happen, and then they would conserve some area, and maybe they would have some low density housing in that other area, but they would have all Res 6. That was our sense. It's adjacent to Spring Hollow and those areas up there. That's all Res 9. The Sabin Street's Res 6. So we were like, that just makes sense. We'll make it all Res 6. And council said, let's put Riverfront in the bottom to say that's where we want that to be and make the rest rural. If you were to actually do the math, had the same number of potential dwelling units, both like 450 housing units, but one kind of forced them into, you have to develop down here at this density and not at this density. And so we're trying now to change that. Alan's Crestview property is still in the old system of there's a lot of Crestview that really can't be, and Alan would be the first one to say he wouldn't propose building. It's got wetlands and deer yards, and he would cluster these over in a place where the development is appropriate and conservation is appropriate in other areas. I think that and it is in our growth center. It is walkable to the downtown, which is why it's still zoned the way it is. And if a project happens there, he's got a lot of flexibility to come up with good ideas. And meets certain requirements. So I think it's just different approaches to how you zone an area. One is we can constrain and say, as we did with, we'll use Country Club Road as the example. We took the 100 acres that really aren't buildable and turned them green. And then we've got the other areas that are buildable that we zoned as urban residential and res 3000 because that was appropriate. And that's probably a good way of doing it until such time as we build a road across. And then maybe some little parts right along that road, however it goes across, would be, we'll have a change of zoning as well. Because it doesn't make sense if we're running sewer and water, unless we're just running a road and there's no sewer and water, in which case keep it rural because people are going to have to drill wells and put on-site septic. But if there's sewer and water connecting through there, it would be a waste of our resources to put infrastructure into a place that we would keep as a zone rural. But we'll figure that out when we get there. And they're going to have an area, if you kind of pan back over to Sabins, you can see this is what we're referring to. You see the rural area, but you see there's some fields up at the top. You know, that's something to be considered as we're looking at this. We've got those areas. Maybe it's zoned rural, but it could support some housing, and we should consider that as we work with Alan and Doug about what we want to see for a new zoning district up there. But you can see there's certainly areas that could be built, but there's certainly a lot of this that won't be built because it's just plain unbuildable, or very difficult to build. And I think they recognize that and they're comfortable with that. But we'll come up with some good things for here. And I think until there's plans for Crestview, I don't know if I would change that. I like leaving the zoning in a general sense. You know, my professional recommendation would be in a parcel such as that, which is mostly forested, I would say let's leave it as that and let him move forward with a PUD if he's ready to come up with a proposal for Crestview.
Yeah, I would not roll back anything to be less permissive than it currently is.
What's the urban residential zone? Well,
It's kind of a
over here.
It's kind of a unique district. That's the only place that it's found. And it really was to reflect the fact that the city owns this and we want to provide a flexible environment for our negotiations with any developer. So it allows up to 5 stories. It's got very permissive rules, but we can do that because we actually own the property.
This is like the entrance to the country club.
Yep, the country club road in that lower area. Now, granted, there's also 14 acres of this that is being held in reserve for recreation. So there's a large chunk of this that's already been on a set aside. That's like, this was a big chunk, $1 million of the purchase price of this property was from the recreation fund for the purposes of having a place to put a,
It like overseas.
so that way they could have a place, knowing that the Berry Street rec facility has issues. We're going to need another rec facility at some point. This isn't in the downtown, but it would provide an opportunity, especially if we got the buses running. If we had a loop that could get buses and everything else, we could help people get out there more efficiently. But we could put a larger recreation facility that could have tennis courts and basketball courts and other opportunities, maybe an indoor walking track for the community to enjoy. And then we would also have more outdoor fields because we lost a lot of our outdoor fields in the floods. Dog River Field is kind of more of a big dog park at this point. We lost those rec fields. We had a number of rec and park facilities across the street at Home Farm Way. Those got flooded out. So the Parks and Rec department really needed some space. So they've got about 14 acres. So kind of half of this peach colored area has been kind of set aside for them. And then half of it would be for the highest density residential. And we'll see what comes out of the proposals.
Will this eventually be reorganized into the existing zoning?
I think it would. It would make sense that it would. If let's say hypothetically the decision is we're going to completely change and we're going to end up with a lot of smaller duplexes, kind of more res 3000 looking, instead of having this with some big apartment buildings, 4 or 5 big apartment buildings, maybe it ends up being many smaller buildings like Loomis and Liberty and those streets like that. Well, then we would have to rezone it after that. But at this point, in order to give the flexibility to developers to propose something, we really wanted to urban residential, you could do a res 3000 as your proposal, but you also could do some of these larger buildings. And then once we've got it figured out as to what we want it, then we can adjust the zoning and eliminate that district because I don't think it makes sense. We had a question when we proposed this, where else would we think an urban residential might be appropriate? The only place we could off the top of our heads think of was if National Life decided they're going to start re-envisioning the Hill, to start going through and saying, you know what, we've got a big Class A office building. What's going to be the long-term vision for this? Do we think that's going to end up continuing to be a viable? Maybe it is. I hope it is. Everybody hopes it is. But if there's going to be a change there, maybe there's some larger scale urban residential. But that's really the only other large parcel that could fit. I mean, it could fit in maybe the lower part of Sabins, but I don't think it works. I think it's more likely that this will end up being more like Riverfront than vice versa. You know, that this would end up having the same zoning as our new Stonecutters Way.
Can you talk about Riverfront? I mean, to me, like thinking about Country Club Road and Sabin, like that could really, there's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment there. You know, I know the co-op bought that lot, but it's like, boy, that's, you know, I think of like the transit center, that's like a perfect place for sort of raised apartment buildings or something, given the river room to breathe. You sounded like there's a little frustration with that riverfront zoning. Like, what's the staff imagine there? Do you see that as connective tissue to Country Club Road, or what have you guys thought?
My thought is I would, just looking at districts based on their character. And when I think of character, I'm really kind of thinking of the bulk and the massing. And you just think about Stonecutters Way, and to think you drive down Berry Street, it's very different than driving down Stonecutters Way. And you know, Stonecutters Way are these larger commercial buildings, office buildings, the co-op, and then as you go across on Granite Shed Lane, you've got the old granite sheds on your way out to Caledonia Spirits. And so these are all really larger structures. Now, I would not limit these to commercial. You know, some other places might have called this a commercial industrial district. I really want to see this infill with housing. And it actually, when it was envisioned, I wasn't aware of this. Someone was talking about this, may have been Jim Sheridan was talking about this, that the initial plan for Stonecutters Way was that it was supposed to be a mixed use residential, commercial, and at the end of the day, it was kind of sold into, you know, commercial office, commercial office, commercial office, co-op. But we have a number of opportunities. The granite shed that Connor has, he's fixed up. There's been conversations about the granite shed that's on the end, right on Granite Street. There's potentials that some of these and the vacant lot with maybe the co-op considers putting in some warehouse and parking, but maybe they also consider residential. But we should certainly allow residential as a potential use in this whole stretch, because I think over time, that's, you know, as long as there's more work from home, remote work, those types of things, I think there's going to be more conversion to apartments, and we've got to look at that potential.
I just look at walkability and it's like,
Yeah.
so great. I mean, you know. So good.
It's also the, who was here last week to talk about kind of bringing the city back to the river, you know, John.
Oh, John Copan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I run across this every day. So I'm very familiar with it. But I feel like, you know, back before the automobile, we needed all the industrial and commercial to be on rivers so that we could transport goods. And then the railroads came in and they just pretty much just built themselves along the same rivers that we were using before to transport goods. Now we don't really need the rivers to transport goods anymore. And it'd be nice if I could see this area being, like you're saying, full of like residential buildings like a waterfront, actually like a place where you can actually go and enjoy
Oh,
the
it'd be
waterfront,
beautiful,
you
right?
know, like it could be beautiful. I run across there every day.
It's already
I
actually
brag
pretty
to my,
nice. It just
it's
be cool if it
beautiful,
was
but you can't
mixed
see it.
use. Yeah.
Yeah. And I brag to friends across the country about my beautiful run, you know, in Vermont here.
That's
But
the
yeah.
granite shed.
But it is like, if you're looking at the river, it is like
It is.
like gorgeous. So like the mountains and the trees, like it's beautiful. But we are cut off from it from all these industrial uses, which are no longer really even used because it doesn't look like all these warehouses are full.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of rezoning that to some like future idyllic vision would be great.
Yeah, and as much as we want residential everywhere, I also want to leave open the possibility of commercial space. You know, like who wouldn't want a birch grove there too that they can pop to, right? That is also something I want to have as a possibility.
So like not a res 6,000 but more.
I mean,
like a
actually, it's
mixed
one of the
use.
things Mike mentioned, but actually, it is, the current zoning is actually really flexible, and I kind of liked it, but he kind of mentioned like he didn't like it.
No, the only thing I didn't like is the fact that the bulk and massing don't work because the zoning is really geared towards Berry Street. So it's really looking at small stuff. So if you want to build
Bigger.
if you want to build something big like the co-op building, or if you wanted to build a larger residential structure, you're automatically going to have to go in for a waiver of the footprint requirement because it's talking about, you know, the largest you could have is a 5,000 square foot footprint. So you're like, okay, well, it doesn't take long. You've got houses with 5,000, you know, big house, but you know, 5,000 square foot, you're going to very quickly, you know, you look at Caledonia Spirits, the Granite Sheds, the co-op, they're all vastly bigger than that. So it would make sense to have a district where we could adjust that. So that way these are more permitted uses and not having to go to the DRB because I'm going to build a 9,000 square foot footprint building. It's consistent with the Stonecutters zoning district. And then Berry Street can keep its same, or like I said, I think Berry Street also could very easily convert into mixed use residential because it does have a number of shops, offices. It's more residential than the commercial, but at the same time, I don't think that's enough to throw it out of a mixed use residential. But we can compare those numbers to make sure that the, you know, the lot sizes and everything match. But I think that would work. Fairly straightforward. I mean, we've kind of moved a few chess pieces around, but we still end up with roughly 12 zoning districts. But if we were eliminating the neighborhoods, you've taken an entire layer out. So that may be one of the considerations of, and then you don't have the neighborhood descriptions because you've got a district description that would be in there instead. So it might shorten things up, tighten things up. We could talk about, again, if we're talking about consolidating and working on things, how many places can we eliminate the architectural standards because we already have? If the entire district is in the design review, then why do we need the architectural standards? Maybe we can move those out because that's going to be addressed through the other regulations.
Can I ask about height? I know I've brought it up a couple times in different form, and I get the sense, like, I don't know if Meredith's got anything, but I get the sense that it's just like, oh, we don't want to talk about height. And I feel like in the downtown, if I were looking at doing a new building, right, I mean, I'm sorry, I know we say whatever you guys, I know you have the official water stuff. My wife works at Green Mountain Care Board. I saw the video, that was 12 feet of water when it was cresting and stuff. It was crazy. There's no way I would build any building that didn't, I mean, it's gonna be 20 feet before I'm gonna put anything good, right? It's gonna be what you saw down in New Jersey, right? It's gonna be like, hey, parking or whatever, it's something that can be completely washed out. To me, I feel like we need to give people another floor or two just because of the water. But I felt like maybe you guys aren't, that doesn't resonate, or maybe that's just from meetings you've had with the community.
My general recommendation has been just that for the most part, we have a 60-foot limit in the downtown. and almost nobody meets it. So, I mean, there's a lot of room for people to add more up above. And the question starts coming in, if we allow 6 to 8 stories and people drop a 6 to 8 story building next to a 3-story building, because that's what's, a lot of the downtown is really three-ish.
You know, I hear that, and then I go
3, 4.
to Burlington and I look at what SD Ireland did over the mall, and I'm like, doesn't affect the skyline, like, it's cool. Like, I'm so glad, I mean, it took them forever, but I'm glad that they're finally, opening up some of those apartments and stuff. So I mean, I know
Yep.
that that's what people are gonna say, but there's plenty of awesome historic towns that you go to that here's the historic town, right? Go to Park City, right? It's like all the old, it's so cool, right? Here's this old cool mining town, and you got a big Marriott that's whatever, 20 stories tall. It doesn't change the historic awesomeness of Park City.
Is
Still
that-
awesome.
It's a policy, and again, that's a policy decision, and everyone's welcome to. That was the reason why I said it was just, it didn't, as we said,
It's just
there
for the
didn't
best
seem to be
use.
there didn't seem to be a need for it. We could certainly push, it would certainly, the argument of, well, with the floods, maybe we need to have the heights adjusted. That would certainly potentially make an argument. It's like, well, we're at 60, maybe we could go to 72.
Yeah, that's
And
just
those small things, but I think at the end,
Yeah.
there's not.
I don't think we need to up it to 100. Does anybody remember Peter Kellman's visioning document that he sent us during the city plan input? He described on the RK Miles lot that now belongs to the co-op at least a 10-story building. And over there, at it's now empty, I think. He was describing I don't know, 5-story building, maybe 8. I don't know. It was a tall building. He accepted the fact that it was going to need a variance downtown to get a building that high. But I do think that a 10-story building somewhere on the river there or down in the riverfront district would be great. I think that across the street and the lot next to the drawing board, put a 5-story building there. That'd be great.
You can.
Those public housing towers they've got there, they're pretty big, right?
Well, the one is a 10-story. I think it's 110 feet. Was one of the tallest in the state.
Like the second tallest in the state still, I think.
Is it still second tall?
Second
Yeah.
tallest. Which one is this? The towers in the Bering. Oh, in Bering, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, they've got varying heights. I think their requirements are very similar to ours, about 5 stories or 60 feet. But yeah, certainly there are places where if you're outside of the downtown, some larger buildings can, depending on how you're fitting them in, can fit in. Like I said, it might be easier to put a big building like that on Stonecutter's Way than it is to try to fit a big building like that in.
I'm sure that the pitchforks would come out, but I do think that a tall building over there would be very reasonable.
Just think we have to acknowledge the water, even if we just,
Yeah.
maybe we go bigger, but like the 60 to 72. But Meredith had her hand raised, so
Yeah.
no.
It was just another idea. Although I know Mike isn't a fan of waivers. But right now the max allowed waiver of the height maximum in all the zoning districts is 5 feet. So playing around with how restrictive that is
Making it.
might also provide another avenue in addition to the just adding another story approximately in all of the downtowns or all the zoning districts that have a lot of floodwaters.
So like a 12-foot, but then it could be, somebody could propose on Stonecutter's Way. You're just gonna have to come in and ask for
Right.
the exception.
And that gives you, especially for those parcels that are particularly low and close to the river, they might be able to say, hey, because we are in a place that does flood so much, or has the capacity to flood significantly, we really need more height waivers so that we can get the parking underneath or, have these split levels, as well as, making sure that you have a roof that is peaked, not flat, because it's easier for maintenance and all of those things that go into it, as well as oriented for solar.
Yeah, no,
Wait, so-
that is actually a really good idea. We do have that with the footprint. So there is the 5,000 square foot footprint max, but actually it's unlimited. You can go and get a waiver to any size footprint. You just, it obviously it's going to get harder and harder the bigger and bigger your footprint is. But that's one of them. But we could do a similar with height that, if you want to open up the flexibility to say, because remember, what we're trying to do is set up rules that's like, if you want to meet this requirement, Meredith can give you the permit. If you want something more than that, so you can go up to, let's say we had it where you can get a 50% up to 50% increase in height, but you got to go to the DRB and talk about the character of the area, the dreaded character of the area. Will have an impact on it. But then it comes in, it's like, well, let's see, my height requirement is 40 feet. If I want to meet 40 feet, Meredith gives me a permit. If I want 55 feet in that zoning district, I'm going to be taller than the buildings around me. We're going to have a hearing and we're going to have a conversation about it. In some cases, it might be my building backs up against this hillside, or I'm in a low spot, and therefore the height really matches the surrounding buildings when you look at it, or whatever. Or it's just, you know what, this is going to be a really cool building. It's at the end of the street. All the other buildings on the street are this height. At the end of the street, it's going to have this bigger, grander building that looks awesome. Let's hear the stories, but having the flexibility gives the developer the opportunity to think about how we can do something different with a site. But again, the rules are, if you want your quick and easy permit, then meet these rules. We get you your permit and on you go. If you want to have those special treatments, then we allow it.
I think wherever possible, it's important to codify in zoning regulations. I think that waivers are fine to have, but going in front of the DRB with any level of waiver that you're asking for, I think you're going to get a lot of opinions presented, and sometimes, maybe often, it will not go through the DRB. So I think wherever possible that you can have administrative approval, because it's codified within the zoning regulations, that is going to be a huge advantage to getting housing and development done. And I will take this opportunity to just very briefly talk about the DRB hearing that happened last Monday, where a waiver was requested, was for a curb cut. And it was in an area in Res 9000 that the requirements within our zoning regs say that it has to be 45 feet minimum from another curb cut or driveway. And this should have been a waiver that went through the DRB 10-minute conversation and approved, in my opinion. It ended up being an hour-plus long conversation. The quorum for the DRB was 4 people, which meant it had to be a unanimous decision. There were neighbors and non-neighbors who had very strong feelings and opinions about what could potentially in the future happen on that piece of property, which was not in discussion that evening. What was in discussion was the very minimal waiver for a driveway that would have been less than 45 feet from another driveway. And they decided at the end of the meeting to not approve the curb cut. So this feels to me like listening to that conversation happen is where my opinion comes from around really codifying it in the zoning regulations as much as possible, because when waivers are head to the DRB, you will get a lot of very strong opinions, folks that want to push back against housing throughout our city. And as much as there can be administrative approval, I think that's where housing is going to happen in Montpelier.
What road was that on?
Town Hill.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. I mean, I just think, I think the height thing is gonna be, I think it's gonna be contentious.
It will be. But I think that if we can push forward with some, height opportunity codified in zoning regulations, or at least recommended to city council.
Yeah.
I think we should take that opportunity.
And I think it's important to note that making these regulations more permissive, these changes are not going to happen overnight. They're not going to happen next year. That this is just like generational change for the city.
Yeah.
Allowing generational change for the city, that unless your neighbors all around you all sell their property all at once, nobody's coming through to level neighborhoods.
Yeah, we also have a city plan now that is approved by city council that within that document states that in the next 20 years we will have an additional 1,500 units in Montpelier.
Yeah.
The only way that happens.
So Maria asked earlier, how large is Montpelier? And I said 10 square miles. And I looked it up and I thought, 8,000 people. I wonder how big Burlington is. And technically it's larger, but they have 10 square miles of land. They're larger because they include a large chunk of Lake Champlain, but they also have 10 square miles of land and a population of in the 40,000 range.
Yeah.
So I think that 16,000 or some larger number is fine.
It's doable. There's a lot of opportunity in Montpelier from really large parcels that could be developed, should be developed, and a ton of infill and new height opportunities.
The other thing I'll just say, like, I think is we're talking about this conversation, the bigger projects. And there's there's a process and there's lots of changes happening there, right? And so, but when we're having little infill projects that we know are the heart of what we really need to, like, in terms of this, hey, what do we codify? What do we allow there to still be, big community discussions? I think the more that we can empower as much infill as possible, like that really is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't recognize the amount of infill that we've been having so far. And, I think what did we have last year? I think we added 27 new housing units last year, I think was the count. And it's kind of like, oh, but people don't even notice it because really it's a lot of these infill. It's an accessory apartment here, it's a duplex here, it's a triplex here, it's a yeah. Oh yeah. But it's just people
Hey, let's
think, oh, I don't want that. That's going to be a lot of change. I don't want that much change. And it's like we just had 27 units and the sky isn't falling. If we keep doing this, we're going to notice that building on the corner is different, or that's now a duplex or a triplex, but it's not having the change that I think that opponents want you to believe that when we have this infill that it's going to drastically change how things look. I think for the most part, you're barely going to notice that increase in population and that increase in dwelling units.
That's true. You might notice a brand new building next door to you, which looks awesome.
So Gabe's leaving. I'm gonna direct my question at you. So the thought at the drawing board, I think, has now proven itself to be like uneconomical to build on. Because it's been sitting vacant and the city keeps going out for RFPs for people to purchase it and develop something on it. Would the height, is the height restriction at all impacting the potential development of this one small lot?
So I'll just give, this is my opinion, right? And we'll know better, I think, as with this project that Mike's doing with Country Club and the RFP. My view is that we need to set some price points for both rent and sale of condos and things like that that are not currently set. And so people that are looking at trying to do development are not sure these projects are going to be worth doing, right? And so every project that we do is really important because we're setting new baselines of this is what's the realm of possible is, right? And so I look at Country Club Road, and honestly, I feel like, and I've said this to Mike before, so it's not, I think it's like a 10-year out project. I just feel like developers that are coming and looking at it are going to say, look, it doesn't pencil today. We're not sure that it pencils. We don't know. But if we can get some of these infill, like we get, James Moore and Zach to like build some, fourplexes and they're selling, $450,000, $500,000 condos, right? Then people can say, oh, there is a market there. I think, and this is a city council decision, I think all you got to do is look to Barry on how to do it, sell it for $1 to downstreet. That's how you do it. That's my view, but that's not what city council wanted to do. I wasn't in all those meetings, but you were, Mike, and I think
Yep.
they felt like, well, there's some value to this. And it's like, well, if you give it away for free, then, and I kind of feel the same thing with federal building. I know there's other thoughts about that, but it's like make make the government put it out for auction and see who'll actually buy it. Don't offer these guys. I think it's my view of it, it's like it's a tear down. That's my view, but that's a whole, that could get really political, but I think it's nobody knows for sure that the economics make sense and it's a ton of risk. I think that's the reality.
Yeah, I think building market rate new in the environment we have today is expensive, and it's going to result in things that are probably going to look really nice, and maybe they end up with rents that people are just not used to seeing and thinking they're building not for Montpelier, they're building for other people to move to Montpelier, and this isn't what we want. But we have to have a mix in there and hope that we can work in a mix where because we can't just have downstreet housing. Downstreet gets a lot of funding. There's certain income requirements, and then they also get discounted property taxes. Well, those are the property taxes we need to pay for the TIF, to pay for those road bonds. So we need to have a certain amount of market in there. And what we all want is we want that middle income housing that, whether it's rental, we want the whole range. So we've got room for folks who are either retired or young. We've got places for them to rent and own, and we've got condos. We just kind of need a whole range. Unfortunately, what's marketable, what works in the market right now is more on the high end or at the low end. And we're still kind of stuck with how do we get the middle going? And that's the challenge.
I feel, isn't the economics that currently things are renting for a lot higher than they would be if not for a housing crisis? So you build these new beautiful buildings and you charge a high rent for them. That's gonna also result in all of these other rental properties maybe devaluing, right? Because a middle class can now actually move in because
Their value just won't go up as fast.
Yeah.
And
because
the people who can afford the market rate,
same. Man, when I lived in San Francisco, our rent was only $500 more than the rent of and so it is pretty striking. Like the rents are very high here for things that shouldn't garner that much rent. So so if we were able to build new buildings that were beautiful and those became like the expensive apartments, then there'd be more opportunity for middle class to move into these.
For people that can afford
It's
that,
harder.
because right now, if you can't afford a really nice apartment, there isn't that room available for you. So it drives up the cost of the medium quality buildings all of a sudden charge a high quality rate. So yes, my answer is yes to everything. I just know as we get going, people are, if we built our first project and it was all at 2,800 and 3,000 $3,000 rents, there'd be a lot of people up in arms about, wait, we just gave a whole bunch of, we sold it to them for $1 and gave them all these breaks so they could go and rent these things at costs that nobody can afford. Well, I think there's going to be a mix.
That would happen with downstream.
Wouldn't happen with Down Street, but we've got to have a mix because Down Street doesn't have to pay the same property taxes that we
right.
need to pay the.
Every other building in town is run by Downstreet.
But I think we need that mix. True. True. And I think that's what we're looking at is.
You know, that is, it's not just like, oh, it's an empty lot. It's like an empty lot that's like actively devaluing our town. You know, like it's unmown,
Oh, for the 1216
full of
main,
litter.
yes.
You know, like any use would be better than what's currently happening.
And I think it's gonna take time. I think people will come around to looking at that lot again.
Which one?
1216 Main, that's the
Drawing
one
board.
next to the drawing
Next to the
board.
drawing board.
I think it'll come back. I think we just need to, the flood and everything has kind of changed how people look at stuff, I think. And but I think we will see these and I think things will start to come together. That's my hope. I mean, I'm the planning director. I've got to.
Steam, right? Like we're just gonna have some successes and
Yeah.
then new people will look at things differently, but we get, more of the stuff we do, the better.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is sort of bring this full circle. You know, we're talking about flood resiliency, we're talking about providing incentives for developers. The question really is like that 60-foot cap, like that 60-foot limit in the downtown district is like, is that enough? I don't have the answer to that. I don't develop it, but I'm assuming that everything that goes in, this probably includes the federal building at some point, like you gotta add 12 to 15 feet on that first floor for a parking garage or, you know, whatever, to provide that flood resiliency. Like, I don't know how much, you know, is 4 floors above that make it viable? Or does it have to be 5? I just don't know. So that's kind of the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just don't know where
Yeah,
we get the information.
I
Like,
think it's
mean,
really-
we've gotten some really helpful feedback from some developers, and I think that's super helpful to say, like, what does that look like? So all I know is like the new buildings we put in or the retrofits we do to the existing buildings are going to look different than what Main Street looks like now. And we just got to get over that hump. I mean, we're gonna get resistance from that, but I think, you know, to Sean's point, like this doesn't happen overnight. It's not like somebody puts in a 100-foot tower on that lot
Right.
tomorrow. It's just, but I'm most concerned about sending strong signals through whatever revisions we make here to developers to say, you know, we welcome some of these like moonshot projects, frankly.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously, you know, section 4 is like, there's a lot of process involved to do that, and that's protective, but, yeah, there's just a lot of new pieces, but this discussion is great so far.
And also bringing things back full circle, back to like the urban center 1 designation. So I've realized that area of East State Street, that's like before, well, it's kind of like as the hill's rising. I've always loved all of the kind of like, it's like there's houses within houses, you know, like there's like little alleys almost. And I just realized that is urban center 1. And is that why those buildings can be there? Because it's not, there isn't that, because they are allowed to build to the block, right, with urban center 1.
Yes.
And
Yep.
so if we designated urban center 2 and 3 as urban center 1s, then we could get those infill projects of like the building behind the building would emerge, right?
And new construction in the flood zone has to all be elevated, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, you know, no matter what, you'd have to meet the flood requirements. And we did, you know, an interesting project that had been proposed at one time that didn't end up going anywhere was out where the TD Bank next to School Street and the old Necky building. There was a proposal to put in a 6-story building to kind of take those, because they were kind of damaged and weren't sure if they wanted to renovate or replace. And so the thought was, well, if we combine those parcels, we could put in something much larger. And it was just kind of something that a previous owner had talked about. But again, it was like, hey, that would be an interesting change that would really kind of add a lot to park underneath and have those 6 stories. And it was like, wow, that would be a big change in that part of the town. But I thought it was a great idea. It didn't end up going anywhere. But it was just one that I think they were putting the feelers out to see what was possible. And so people do consider these and think about them. Whether they actually make it and go is another question. I will say there is getting to Gabe's point, or maybe it was Aaron's, about the question of 6 stories. There is actually certain things in building code, I believe, that if you go to a lot of places, New Jersey and Connecticut and places, a lot of stuff gets built out at 6 stories because I think there's a building code. They make the first story usually commercial concrete and steel, but then it's wood frame above, and there's something like a 1+5 building, and it's a pretty standard building because once you go one more story above that, it all has to be steel. So you can wood frame. So usually they'll put the concrete and steel on the first floor and then build 5 stories of wood above that because that's what code allows for wood frame, which is more cost effective than hanging steel. But as soon as you add one more story and go to 7 stories, then you're all steel and it becomes a much different economic and construction technique. So sometimes there's a little bit in there on building code. I don't think that's why. I think when the 6 stories was picked 50 years ago, I think it really just came down to they found the biggest building and said that's the height. I think that's as fancy as it is.
I think that's the height as well as keeping it below the State House.
Yeah, at the time they had rules for you can't block the dome.
Well, I think there might still be a little bit of that.
So, all right. Well, we're getting to 7:24. So we've got a lot of notes, and if anyone has anyone here, anyone online or watching, we certainly watch your eyes. We'll keep taking ideas. Just keep throwing ideas. We'll put them all together. And again, as Aaron pointed out, let's go for the getting through the whole process, review the whole document, and then kind of come back with an understanding of, okay, what's going to make the most effective change in making the process efficient and effective. And really, we've got to remember back that our zoning, this is one of our tools to achieve our city plan. And so, our plan talks about a lot of things from protecting the environment to being safe to creating housing. So we really need to make sure we're making sure that our zoning regulations match up with our plan.
Okay, anyone want to move approval of these 2 minutes that we have, or we?
Yeah, I would just note on the last meeting that Steve Whitaker did speak. So that again, sometimes I think that the generic thing says were no members of the public, but as much as regular as Steve is in his attendance, he is still a member of the public.
Oh, yeah. So just scratch that.
Oh, the comment is below it.
Yeah.
Stephen Whitaker
Yeah.
spoke, but right above it, it says no members. Yep.
All right.
And I had on the 11th, I meant to make these changes before I sent it out, but I didn't. For my notes on the 11th, it says approval of the agenda. There was a motion and a second. According to my notes, the motion was by Tim, the second was by Leah. And down below, continue to work on the new zoning. Discussion of part 1, it said Mike and Meredith reviewed the pending changes. Meredith wasn't at that meeting, so it's just Mike reviewed the pending. So those would be the edits I had for the 11th.
Yeah, I move for approval of the minutes with those changes.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
I
Anyone want to move to adjourn?
I will move to adjourn.
second.
That's fast.
Hi.
Thank you again, Ariana.
Thank you.
Arian, yeah. Enjoy your Mondays.